All musicians are surrounded by numbers. The tempo of a track, the gauge of guitar strings, or the number of people who actually show up to a gig. But there is one number in the music world that carries a weight unlike any other. It's a number that feels more like a curse. 27.
We call it the 27 Club. It isn't a real place and it definitely isn't a club anyone actually wants to join. Instead, it's a dark piece of music history. A cultural ghost story that suggests if you are young, talented and famous, your 27th year might be your last.
Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, Jim Morrison, Kurt Cobain, Amy Winehouse – all of them reached the absolute peak of their creative influence, but this peak was cut at exactly 27 years old. Is there something mystical about that specific age, or are we just desperate to find a pattern in the tragedy? In this video, let's try to look beyond the headlines and legends. We're going inside the strange and inconsistent stories of the Big Three, the mysterious origins of the club that go back much further than most people realize, and the wild conspiracy theories that still keep fans awake at night.
Finally, we'll see what science actually says about this phenomenon. Welcome to the mystery of the 27 Club.
The 27 Club didn't become a household name until a single brutal 12-month period between 1970 and 1971. In that short window, the world was the three biggest pillars of the counterculture movement: Jimi Hendrix, Janis Joplin, and Jim Morrison. And when you look at the details of how they left us, the official report starts to feel like there are missing a few pages. Jimi Hendrix was found dead in a London apartment on September 18, 1970. The official cause was barbiturate-related asphyxiation. Basically, he choked. But the inconsistencies started appearing almost immediately. On the night of September 17, Jimmy was in London with his girlfriend Monica Denneman. According to her, they stayed up talking until about 7 a.m.
Monica's story changed several times over the years. Originally, she claimed she woke up around 10:20 a.m. and found Jimmy unconscious but breathing. Later, between 80s and 90s, she claimed they were awake much later and that Jimmy was perfectly fine until much closer to noon. But paramedics reported Jimmy was already cold and blue by 11:27 a.m., suggesting he had been dead for hours.
Denneman originally said she called for help the second she realized something was wrong. In her later years, Monica claims she stayed by Jimmy's side the entire time, even riding in the ambulance with him. However, paramedics gave sworn testimony that the door to their flat was wide open and Jimmy was the only person there. Later, Monica even tried to shift the blame, claiming Jimmy was still alive in the ambulance and died only because of neglect from the hospital staff. But the surgical register, Dr. Bannister, stated Jimmy had no pulse and was clearly dead long before reaching the hospital. At some point, changing the details starts to look like covering the truth.
Such inconsistencies born rumors and conspiracy theories that are still whispered about in the music industry to this day. When the official story doesn't match the medical evidence, the public starts looking for answers in the shadows. But at a moment when the music world was shocked, another tragedy happened in the heart of Hollywood. Just 18 days later, after Jimmy's death, the world of music left Janis Joplin, which was also 27 years old.
Janis was in LA finishing up her masterpiece, The Pearl album. She was happy and was looking forward to the future. But when she failed to show up for her recording session at Sunset Sound Studios, her road manager John Cook drove to the Landmark Motor Hotel to check on her. He found her silver Porsche still in the lot, but room 105 was silent. After several unsuccessful attempts to wake her by knocking, an employee was called to open the door with a service key. Inside the room, Janie's body was found on the floor between the bed and nightstand. The coroner officially ruled it a standard overdose, citing a massive amount of opiates in her system. But the details were strange. When Cook and the initial witnesses entered the room, they reported that it was surprisingly clean. There was no mess associated with the long-term user. Most importantly, there were no drugs, no needles, and no other stuff anywhere. It was a clean, quiet room, and that didn't fit the story the authorities were telling.
This had led many to believe that her inner circle just cleaned the room before the authorities arrived and destroyed the very evidence in order to save her reputation. But there is one more strange detail. If you take a lethal dose of heroin, you don't usually go for a walk.
The confirmed timeline shows that Janis had left her room, walked to the lobby, bought cigarettes, chatted with the hotel clerk, and walked all the way back to her room. When they found her, in one hand she held $4.50 and fresh unopened cigarette pack in other. All these details gave birth to rumors and conspiracy theories.
But while everyone was focused on the tragedy in Hollywood, the clock was already ticking for the final member of Big Three. Less than a year after Janis, the 27 Club was replenished by Jim Morrison.
After Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin died, Jim Morrison started telling his friends you are drinking with number 3. Jim had moved to Paris in March 1971 to take a break from the rock and roll lifestyle and focus on his poetry. He was living with his girlfriend Pamela Curson in a rented apartment. On July 3rd, Jim was found dead in his bathtub at approximately 6 a.m. The official cause of death was listed as a heart failure, although no autopsy was performed as it was not required by French law. Despite this, the musician's friends and family, as well as fans, didn't believe it was the true cause, speculating that it was a heroin overdose instead. The circumstances around Morrison's death became more unclear as Carson's account of what happened that night conflicted over time. In some cases, she told friends that Morrison was regularly using heroin during their time in Paris. In others, the night he died was the first night he tried it. Sometimes she'd say that Morrison had accidentally snorted the drug by mistake, believing it was cocaine, and in other instances she insisted heroin played no role in Morrison's death at all.
Pamela Curson was the only witness who actually found Jim's body, and of course such inconsistencies gave birth to rumors around this case.
One of the theories suggests Jim Morrison actually died in the Rock and Roll Circus nightclub. In his book The End, journalist and friend of Morrison Sam Burnett claimed the singer arrived at the nightclub looking to buy heroin for Carson. After making the purchase, Morrison disappeared into the bathroom, where Burnett stated he later found him. He had white fluid around his lips and nose, and his eyes were closed. A medic in the club proclaimed that Morrison was dead. After that, 2 drug dealers moved Morrison's body back to his apartment to cover up the overdose and protect their boss.
Another theory suggests Jim even staged his own death. However, the truth remains undiscovered. Ironically, Pamela Curson died of a heroin overdose 3 years later, at the age of 27.
But before the 27 Club became a global phenomenon, there were earlier cases that set the stage. On July 3, 1969, exactly 2 years to the day before Jim Morrison would die, the founder of the Rolling Stones, Brian Jones, was found at the bottom of his swimming pool. The official verdict was death by a misadventure, but despite the ruling, rumors have persisted for years that he was actually murdered. Suspicion often falls on a builder who was renovating the house at the time and reportedly had a dispute with Jones over money just before he died. Brian was 27. But the most mystical story belongs to Robert Johnson. He is often considered as patient zero of the 27 Club. The legend says that as a young man, Johnson was desperate to become a great blues musician, but he lacked any natural talent. He tried to play the guitar, but his friends even begged him to stop because his skills were so poor. Then, one evening, Robert disappeared for a month. When he finally returned, he played with a mastery that seemed impossible, like a man who had been practicing for 100 years. People claimed he had sold his soul to the devil at a dark crossroads in Mississippi. As the story goes, Johnson was met by a tall dark figure who took his guitar and tuned it. The devil played a few songs and then handed the instrument back, giving Johnson total mastery of the blues. In exchange for his soul, Johnson was given the power to create the music that changed history forever. His influence was so massive that Rolling Stone magazine ranked him as the 5th greatest guitarist of all time. Nearly every rock legend, from Eric Clapton to Keith Richards, cite him as their primary inspiration. Robert died on August 16, 1938, at the age of 27.
When I turned 27 myself, I got a lot of birthday wishes, but almost every one of them came with a joke about the 27 Club. On one hand it was funny, just a bit of dark musician humor, but on the other hand it was a little bit scary. At the time I was an active musician performing live. I'm happy to say I didn't replenish the club. I made it through that year and I'm still here hoping to climb back on the stage.
The legend of the 70s became a cultural obsession again in 1994, when Kurt Cobain was found dead in his Seattle home at age 27. 17 years later, the club was replenished once more by Amy Winehouse. Her death in 2011 felt like a confirmation to the public that the curse was still active, claiming the most talented souls right at their peak. Because many of these artists died in clean rooms or under unclear circumstances, fans began looking for explanations that the official police reports didn't provide. Here are some of the most widely shared conspiracy theories surrounding the club. The White Lighter myth. One of the most famous legends says that many members of the 27 Club, including Hendrix, Joplin and Cobain, were found with a white disposable big lighter in their pockets. While Big didn't even produce white lighters during the death of the 70s icons, it has become a dark superstition in the music world. Even today, musicians refuse to carry one, fearing it invites a 27 fate. The CIA hit list. A darker theory suggests that the 27 Club isn't a coincidence but a targeted operation. Conspiracy theorists argue that the US government viewed these counterculture icons as dangerous radicals who could start a revolution. By removing them at their peak of influence, they could stop the movement before it became too powerful. The blood sacrifice. Some believe the music industry itself is a modern version of a cult. The theory suggests that to achieve immortal fame and record sales, a sacrifice must be made. By dying at 27, these artists become eternal icons, ensuring their music sells for decades to come, benefiting the elite who run the industry.
Whether you believe in secret societies or just tragic coincidences, these stories show that we aren't satisfied with simple answers. We want to believe these icons were part of something much bigger and much more dangerous. But to separate the myth from the reality, we have to look at the actual data.
In 2011, the British Medical Journal published a massive study led by Adrian Bernard. They tracked the lives of over 1,000 famous musicians. The study found that there was no statistical peak specifically at age 27. In fact, musicians were just as likely to die at 25, 28 or 32. However, the study did confirm there is a massive danger zone between the ages of 20 and 30. Researchers found that musicians in this age group are 2 to 3 times more likely to die than the general population. The reason isn't a curse, it's just their lifestyle. This is the decade where young artists often get their first big taste of fame and money. They have access to high-quality drugs and a high-stress touring schedule. Of course, there are some exceptions like Ozzy or Keith Richards. With such lifestyle they had in their 20s, they should have been members of the club. Instead, they proved that while the industry is dangerous, these numbers aren't a destiny. Another research by Professor Diana Kenny at the University of Sydney looked at over 12,000 musicians. The study found that 56 is actually the age most musicians die. According to the data, the music industry isn't just a career, it's a high-risk environment. The study showed that musicians committed suicide 5 times more often than the average person and became victims of murder 6 times more often than people in other professions.
The 27 Club might not be a scientific fact, but it's a powerful cultural one.
We're obsessed with it because we hate seeing genius interrupted. We want to reason for why so much talent was taken so soon. We create legends of devils at crossroads and secret government hits. We don't want to accept just simple explanations. But as long as we keep spinning their records, the club members stay alive.
This is the end, my only friend, the end.